a Peculiar Occurrence fan? Well, I've opened up a store just for you. So head on over and buy your Peculiar Occurrence gear today. Links are in the description box below. Thank you.
Have you ever heard of the Bloody Code? How about the Black Nun? Today we are talking about something that lay in both true history and in legend. Welcome to Peculiar Occurrences. I am your host, Lilith Nova. Death as a form of punishment has been around for as long as people have existed, though the form of execution taken varies. We have hung people, boiled them in oil, we had burning at the stake, beheading.
Only a miracle can save him.
And so much more. Hanging for crimes has been one of the most popular. It was introduced by Anglo-Germanic tribes in the 5th century, but was abolished by William the Conqueror and replaced with the more humane punishment of castration. And blinding for all things except for the poaching of royal deer. Yeah, you won't get blinded for that one. Yeah. Hanging made a comeback and was reintroduced by Henry the First in the 18th century. Yep. This became the principal punishment for a capital offense. Beheading was only used for those from the more to-do and high-born class.
It's good to be the king.
While women who were caught counterfeiting or murdering their husbands were burned at the stake. I know what you're thinking. Should have been witches, but nope. Witches were hung in England. They were burned in the stake in Scotland. Yep. Burning at the stake was abolished in English in 1790. Public executions were ended altogether in 1868. Yep, 1868. With the curtain finally falling on execution as a punishment in 1969. Yeah, it took that long. Sir Samuel, I'm going to say this wrong, Sir Samuel Romilly once said, "There is no country on the face of the earth in which there have been so many different offenses according to the law to be punished with death as in England." The Bloody Code. In 1688, there were 50 crimes punishable by death on the law books in England. In 1765, this number had risen to 160 crimes. And amazingly, in 1815, these crimes rose to over 220 crimes you could be killed for. The reason for this was due to a new penal code introduced in 1791, which turned most minor misdemeanors into capital offenses. This code became known by the grim nickname of the Bloody Code. And between its introduction and its abolishment in 1822, more than 10,000 men, women, and children were all put to death. The implementation of the code revealed a deep paranoia in the minds of the well-to-do, wealthy folk of the time, and any threats to their possessions, rights, or property. This anxiety just became intensified by the French Revolution.
In the name of the people of France, we place you, King Louis, under arrest.
But, you don't understand.
Which saw the accepted social order turned on its head. Amongst the usual offenses of murder, piracy, rape, and treason were a number of crimes that would seem extremely peculiar to us today, such as begging in the company of gypsies for a month.
Money, food, anything, help me, help me! Get your filthy hands off me, be gone! Please, something, anything, I'm starving to death, I'm poor.
Look what we have got. Beggars.
The malicious maiming of cattle, damaging Westminster Bridge, strong evidence of malice in children between the ages of 7 to 14 years of age. Yeah. Stealing from a shipwreck, general poaching, begging without a license if you are a soldier or a sailor, writing a threatening letter, destroying turnpike roads, stealing from a rabbit warren, pickpocketing goods worth more than 1 shilling, being out at night with a blackened face. In case you don't know, the only people out at night really with a blackened face are chimney sweeps. It was literally targeting the lower class. Cutting down trees. Unmarried mothers concealing a stillborn child. Despite the severity of the punishment, many people that were charged with these crimes, with the exception of rape, murder, robbery, and burglary, were not actually executed, but instead had their sentence permanently postponed, often on the grounds of pregnancy of the offender. Benefits to the clergy.
Your Majesty, I was raised in a convent. I don't indulge in pleasures of the flesh.
You don't put out, he don't get out.
Official pardons.
Execution. Tough guy. Must be pardoned somewhere. Let's see. One left. We're lucky. Yes.
Or performance of military service. Confusement about punishments at the whims of judges greatly affected the consistency of the rule of law, as well as affecting the strength of the sentence handed down, as judges were sometimes unwilling to find a defendant guilty, knowing that they would be executed. Forgery, the false making or altering of a document with the intent to defraud. In 18th and 19th century law, forgery was listed underneath deception laws, which also included bankruptcy, fraud, and perjury, and illegally purchasing documents such as marriage certificates and illegally putting the names into registries. In England, the offense of forgery was treated as if it were murder, and it was considered as offensive as murder. Although early documents from the Old Bailey show that many times people that committed forgery were punished with the pillory and fines.
It's better to lose your skull cap than your skull.
Later, as the bloody code was implemented, more and more were sent to the gallows to be executed. One reason forgery came to be seen as such a heinous crime was due to the establishment of the Bank of England in 1694. The English financial system became dependent on credit, so any attempt to fraudulate, counterfeit, or copied documents such as stamps or bonds were perceived as an attack on the very foundation England stood on. Most deception laws, along with murder, rape, and piracy, were some of the last sentences to carry capital punishment. In 1832, forgery, except for the forgery of wills and certain powers of attorney, was taken off that list by a preliminary act. Eventually, by 1837, all forms of forgery were off the list and exempt from execution. Now on to Philip Whitehead. Philip Whitehead, an employee at the Bank of England, was determined to live a luxurious life among the high-class bankers of the city. And he did, along with his sister Sarah. Together for years, they lived in the high life, amongst the wealthy. That is, until the lifestyle caught up with Philip, and debt started to mount up. Philip Whitehead soon became drowned in debt, and in a desperate attempt to try to find a way out, he started gambling. This just made things worse, as gambling tends to do, and Philip spiraled further into debt. All the while, Sarah had absolutely no idea the kind of trouble her brother had gotten himself into. She went on living the life of luxury, while her brother was far too proud to tell her of his shortcomings, believing he would soon find a way out of debt. Pretty soon Philip became pretty desperate and decided to forge a check at the bank that he worked at. Philip forged a check for nearly £87, the modern equivalent of nearly £3,000, or 4,144 American dollars. He was soon found out about and arrested, and Sarah had absolutely no idea of her brother's befallen fate. On November the 2nd, 1811, Philip Whitehead was brought in front of a judge at the Old Bailey and sentenced to death for the crime of forgery. His crimes and convictions were kept from his sister Sarah, and his friends moved her to a house on Fleet Street so that she wouldn't have to hear the bells as he was executed. He was hung in January of 1812 at the age of 36. The legend remembers him as Philip Whitehead, which was the beloved name his sister used for him. But records from the Old Bailey states that his true name was actually Paul Whitehead. As well, the transcripts from the trial referred to him as Paul Whitehead. Eventually, Sarah Whitehead returned home looking for her brother. Because it had been so long since she had seen him, she had started to grow worried. For the bank and the employees, this was a matter that had already been resolved and was pretty much forgotten. Staff there seemed almost surprised when Sarah Whitehead turned up on their doorstep looking for her brother. Not wanting to hurt her feelings, one of the employees at the bank told her that Philip was away on a business trip. When she returned the next day, she was told precisely the same thing. And the next day to that one yielded the exact same results. Each and every time Sarah showed up at the bank, she was always dressed in the same attire, a long black dress and a black veil over her face, which made the staff and customers a little uneasy. Sarah showed up every single day looking for her brother until one day one of the staff members felt sorry for her and told her of his fate. The shock of hearing this development had a significant impact on this poor girl. Learning of his fate was bad enough, but being kept in the dark for such a substantial amount of time was even worse. Sarah's grief took a disturbing turn when, after finding out the fate of her brother, she again returned to the bank asking to see her brother, dressed again in the same black attire with the black veil. Something about her appearance seemed much more intense, though. Clearly, she was in denial about what she had previously been told, while her persistence unnerved people even more than before. Even from behind the veil, one could tell that Sarah Whitehead was descending into madness. Sarah continued to return to the bank, day after day after day after day after day, though no one had the heart to repeat the story to her. Each day that she went there, she would get the same reply, "Not today, ma'am." She became known to employees and customers as Rouge Benoit, or the Black Nun. It is believed that the governor of the bank at that time made the decision to offer her a compromise, provided that she not enter the bank for the rest of her life. Sarah Whitehead would receive a fixed salary for compensation from the death of her brother, and whatever grief and inconvenience that not being informed had on her. Sarah agreed to this, and in this account, kept her word for the rest of her life. She didn't bother the bank or the employees. Yet in 1818, she had completely lost her mind and started to become aggressive, and started to accuse the bank of hiding money that belonged to her. And it is said that one day Sarah spotted the owner of the bank going about his business while at the stock exchange. She approached him and called him a villain and a robber and demanded £2,000. It's said that at that time he handed her half a crown and told her to be on her way, which is about a quarter in USD. She oddly accepted the money, thanked him, and left. Though others say, in a different version of the story, that to try to help her, the bank gave her a room in the back, and on occasion, food. And that day after day after day, she would loiter outside the Bank of England and asked anyone who would listen about her brother Philip. But that soon the employees became weary of Sarah's daily visits and were put onto alarm every time she came near the building. They felt as if the bank's good nature towards Sarah was being taken advantage of. Yet Sarah returned every single day for the next 25 to 30 years, wandering around outside, speaking of Phil, until the day she died. Either way, Sarah died about 30 years after her brother. When the Bank of England discovered that the woman had passed away, they offered to bury her remains in a plot behind the Bank of England. Could this have actually been like the worst thing they could have possibly done to her? They say that due to this, Sarah's spirit roams the grounds of the Bank of England, completely bound to the place, still looking for her brother Philip. For the last few centuries, there have been countless reports of a woman in black asking if people have seen her brother Philip in and around the institution. Not far away from the Bank of England is its namesake, Underground Station. A ghostly apparition of a woman all in black has been seen there as well, with seeing apparitions and having overwhelming feelings of apprehension, hearing moans and wails all along the platform. But the bank's underground station has a history, a dark history, all of its own, with it being originally built on the pits of the Great Plague. It was also one of numerous safe points used during World War II, during air raid warnings. In 1941, a German bomb fell on it and caused 19 civilians their lives. So as you can see, this place has a lot of reason to be very highly haunted. These days, the Bank of England and its underground railways are a huge tourist attraction, especially for those that want to ghost hunt. So if you ever go there, be wary of a ghostly voice asking if you've seen her brother. It just might be the Black Nun, Sarah Whitehead. So what do you think about that one? Pretty good, pretty peculiar, definitely peculiar. Let me know down in the comments below. And hey, while you're down there, why don't you go pick you up one of these Peculiar Occurrence t-shirts or sweatshirts, or hey, I have them in all kinds of different styles. I also have a lot of other merchandise if you want to check it out in the description below. Yeah, so if you like this video, like what this was about, give it a thumbs up. If you like this series, please subscribe and hit that little bell button while you're there so you know when I upload. Every Friday at 4 p.m. I'll have another one of these just for you. And until next time, keep your eyes peeled for all things peculiar. Do 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 do.
Are you listening? Damn. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.